Is old age a time to enjoy peaceful days after years of hard work? Or is it a period of regrets and mistakes that can never be undone? Today, we bring you a touching story about a couple entering their twilight years, still holding on to unfulfilled dreams and ambitions. But sometimes, illusions can lead people astray, and by the time they realize the truth, it may already be too late to turn back. Join us as we listen to Fading Dreams of Old Age, a profound tale of love, betrayal, and the costly lessons of growing old. A gentle Florida breeze swept through Edward Truce's silver hair. He stood on the balcony of his small apartment, gazing out at the ocean, where the waves quietly kissed the shore. He took a deep breath, tasting the salt of the sea, yet inside, he felt an unfamiliar emptiness. This was supposed to be the dream he and Linda had longed for, a peaceful retirement, where they could fully enjoy their golden years. But why? After all these years of anticipation, did this dream fail to bring the happiness he had imagined? Edward Truce, now 70, had once been a literature teacher in a small Texas town. Throughout his life, he had inspired countless students with his passion for poetry, yet he had never achieved success in the literary world himself. The poems he had written in his youth remained nothing more than old, forgotten pages tucked away in a drawer. He had always believed that one day, when time was no longer a constraint, he would finally dedicate himself fully to his craft. Beside him, Linda Truce, 68, was a practical woman, never swept up in artistic fantasies like her husband. For years, she had accepted a simple life with Edward, yet deep down, she longed for luxury, a life where she could indulge in the finer things that youth had never granted her. She believed in fate, in the idea that when one door closed, another would open, and Florida was her chance for a fresh start. After months of deliberation, they made a bold decision to sell their ancestral home in Texas, a place that had been part of their lives for over 4 decades, and move to Florida, a land bathed in sunshine, where retirees spent their final years sipping cocktails by the pool, embarking on lavish cruises, and most importantly, getting a second chance at life. The promises of old age. Edward believed that this would be the golden time when he could finally fulfill his literary dream. He imagined himself sitting at a seaside cafe every morning, sipping coffee as he wrote heartfelt poetry, dreaming of the day his work would be recognized. He pictured conversations with local writers, passionate poetry readings, and audiences nodding in admiration. Linda, on the other hand, had no interest in literature or her husband's lofty dreams. To her, this was an opportunity to enjoy the things she had always longed for: fine dining, luxury vacations, high-end spa treatments, and, most of all, the feeling of living a fulfilling life. She had grown tired of years spent scrimping and budgeting every expense. Now, she wanted to indulge, free from worry. In the early days of their new life in Florida, everything unfolded just as they had hoped. Their apartment was small but cozy, bathed in warm sunlight. Edward felt rejuvenated, while Linda happily immersed herself in new social circles, attending cocktail parties and joining spiritual groups that promised fortune and luck. But as the initial excitement faded, reality began to creep into their lives. They had no solid financial plan, no steady source of income, and the money from selling their home was dwindling rapidly, swallowed by extravagant dreams. Edward realized that the literary world was far from welcoming, that his poems were not as well received as he had imagined. Linda, too, began to see that the lavish lifestyle she pursued was far more expensive than she had anticipated. The dream of old age they had so firmly believed in started to crack, and they had no idea that the path ahead would only lead them further astray. Edward and his literary dream. Edward spent all his time at the cafe, writing poetry and submitting his work everywhere, only to be met with rejection after rejection. On social media, fellow poetry enthusiasts showered him with empty praise, feeding his illusions of talent. Desperate for recognition, he began spending money to self-publish his poems and buy advertisements, only to be mocked by the online community. Each morning, Edward woke up with the eagerness of a young man just beginning his literary journey. With his notebook in hand, he would spend hours at the small cafe on the corner, sipping the bitter espresso and scribbling lines of poetry he believed to be masterpieces. To him, this was more than just a pastime. It was a long-lost dream finally coming to life. But every submission he sent out was met with the same lifeless response: rejection. At first, he reassured himself that even the greatest poets had faced rejection. But as the words "better luck next time" appeared over and over again, doubt started to creep in. Was his poetry truly that bad? Luckily, on social media, he discovered an online community of poetry lovers. There, he received encouraging comments and enthusiastic praise. "Wonderful. You have the soul of a true poet. These verses truly touch my heart." These words became his salvation from self-doubt. He began to believe that he truly had talent, that the world simply hadn't recognized it yet. Fueled by newfound motivation, Edward decided to invest even more. He turned to self-publishing services, spending thousands of dollars to print his first poetry collection, Whispers of the Sunset. He spared no expense on Facebook ads, hired a designer for the book cover, and even paid social media accounts to write positive reviews. But reality was far harsher than he had imagined. The book barely sold. The comments he had been eagerly awaiting were not words of praise, but mockery. An anonymous user shared one of his poems on a major forum with the caption, "A 70-year-old man trying to be a poet. It makes you want to cry, but not in a good way." The internet laughed, ridiculing the very words he had poured his heart into. The truth hit him like a brutal slap. The people who had once praised him online were no different from those who comfort a child just to keep it from crying. He wasn't a great poet waiting for his moment. He was just an old man clinging to a dream that had long since died. He began losing sleep, staring at the ceiling each night, questioning where he had gone wrong. There were moments when he wanted to give up, but his pride wouldn't let him. No, it can't be. He couldn't just fade into obscurity. He had to prove he wasn't worthless. So, he made one final gamble. He sought out a small publisher that agreed to print his book for a hefty price. He used his last savings to print hundreds of copies, personally delivering them to bookstores and small libraries, hoping to find an audience. But all he received were pitiful looks. "We don't have space for this kind of book. Poetry doesn't sell, sir." The rejections echoed like a final verdict on his dream. When he returned home, empty-handed and heavy-hearted, he realized Linda was gone. And then he saw it. An empty ring box on the table and a hotel bill from a luxury resort in Miami, under his wife's name. The truth was no longer confined to the literary world. It was seeping into his very life, preparing to shatter everything he had left. Linda and her superstitious obsession. Linda had become deeply involved in spiritual groups, believing that pilgrimages to distant temples could bring her fortune. One day, while booking a limousine service to attend a spiritual ceremony, she met Tony, a young, ruggedly charming driver with a silver tongue and a talent for flattering older women. But Tony wasn't just a chauffeur. He was a masterful performer, always knowing exactly what to say and how to listen, making Linda feel special. At first, Linda saw Tony as nothing more than an interesting travel companion. But over time, his gentle attentiveness and sweet words made her feel young again. How long had it been since a man looked at her with admiration? How long had it been since she felt desired and valued? Tony often spoke about the wealthy women he had served, those who had changed his life with just a bit of generosity. With subtle precision, he planted the idea in Linda's mind that old age didn't have to be dull and lonely. Life is meant to be enjoyed, and you deserve the very best, he would say as he escorted her to lavish restaurants she had once only dreamed of entering. Gradually, Linda didn't just pay for their trips. She started buying gifts for Tony. Expensive dress shirts, watches, even a small gold ring he once jokingly said would look perfect on his finger. She didn't realize she was being used, or perhaps she did but refused to admit it. She felt youthful, desirable, and that was worth more than anything else. One day, Tony invited her on a trip to Miami, telling her he had a friend with a beachfront villa. It was a turning point in their relationship. Under the golden hues of the sunset, cocktail in hand, Linda felt as if she were living a romantic dream. That night, they crossed a line. But Tony was no love-struck fool. He was merely playing a game, and his chess pieces were Linda's heart and her bank account. As her funds dwindled, so did his affection. The messages were no longer replied to as swiftly. The dates were canceled at the last minute. And then, one day, Tony vanished, without a single goodbye. Panic-stricken, Linda called and texted repeatedly, but it was all in vain. The cold truth began to settle in. How much had she given up, only to be left with nothing? She looked into the mirror. The face staring back at her was that of a 68-year-old woman desperately clinging to an illusion. Shame and regret surged through her. She had betrayed her husband, deceived herself, and now she had nothing. No money, no love, not even her dignity. And the worst part? She knew that sooner or later, Edward would find out everything. She tried to justify her actions, telling herself she had only been seeking a little joy in her remaining years. But what was the truth? The luxury, the parties, the sweet words, all had disappeared as if they had never existed. All that remained was an emptiness heavier than she had ever imagined. She started avoiding Edward, afraid to face reality. But deep down, she knew she couldn't run forever. One day, the truth would come out, and when it did, she would lose the one thing she had never truly appreciated. The man who had stood by her side for over 40 years. Financial ruin. The money from selling their home drained faster than expected. Debts began piling up. The days of luxury and delusions were now nothing more than glaring red numbers on their bank statements. Edward, never one to worry much about finances, finally realized they were on the brink of bankruptcy. Linda, after being used and discarded by Tony, spiraled into panic but still tried to hide the truth from her husband. The unraveling of secrets. One afternoon, while searching for his phone to call the bank about their frozen account, Edward accidentally stumbled upon messages between Linda and Tony. The sweet yet shameless words on the screen made his blood run cold. "I miss you. You're the most special woman in my life. Let's meet tonight. Same hotel as always." The world seemed to collapse around him. His hands trembled, his heart pounded. He couldn't believe what he was reading. The bitter confrontation. When Linda walked into the living room, Edward threw the phone onto the table, his voice hoarse with fury. "What is this? Can you explain this to me?" Linda froze for a moment, but quickly composed herself. She tried to deflect. "It's just a friend, someone I met during my trips." But Edward wasn't so easily deceived. He opened each message, reading them aloud, his voice filled with pain and bitterness. "A friend? What kind of friend meets in a hotel? What kind of friend says they miss you like this? Linda, you betrayed me." Linda had no way out now, but instead of remorse, she lashed out in anger. "And what about you? How many years have you wasted chasing that ridiculous literary dream? Have you ever cared about what I wanted? I wanted a better life, to be loved, not to watch you drown in those meaningless poems no one even reads." Her words cut into Edward's heart like a knife. He had believed that no matter how hard life became, they would see it through together. But now, the brutal truth was clear. Linda had never truly valued him or his dreams. They were both living in delusions, one chasing an unattainable literary dream, the other chasing empty indulgences. Tony disappears. Once Tony realized Linda was out of money, he cut all contact without hesitation. She called, texted, even went to the places he used to frequent, but he had vanished as if he had never existed. He had already found a new target, someone wealthier, someone more naive. Linda collapsed onto the bed, silent tears streaming down her face. For the first time in years, she felt utterly hollow. She had gambled everything away, only to end up with a betrayal far more bitter than the one she had inflicted. The small apartment grew eerily silent. Edward sat in a corner, his gaze distant. His dreams of literature, love, and life, now reduced to nothing but ashes. They had strayed too far down a misguided path, and neither knew if they could ever turn back. The dark days arrived faster than expected. When their last bit of money ran out, they could no longer afford rent, bills, or even basic necessities. Edward, who once dreamed of becoming a poet, now sat motionless before blank pages, realizing that his poetry brought nothing but ridicule online. As for Linda, after being abandoned by Tony, she was left with nothing but shame, bitterness, and the scornful gazes of those around her. At first, they tried to maintain the facade of a normal life. Linda refused to leave the house, afraid of familiar eyes. Edward wandered the streets, searching for any part-time job, but no one wanted to hire a 70-year-old man who only knew how to write poetry. Even the cafes where he used to spend hours writing no longer welcomed him. They had become lost souls in a world they once believed would offer them a fresh start. Their small rented apartment gradually turned into a prison. The fights were no longer as intense as before, but the silence between them was far more terrifying than harsh words. Each was trapped in their own regrets. Edward blamed himself for wasting his final years chasing foolish dreams. Linda couldn't believe she had allowed herself to be so easily deceived. They both wanted to blame each other, but deep down, they knew neither was innocent. One evening, as the streetlights cast a dim glow into their empty apartment, Linda muttered, "We were wrong, Edward. We should never have sold the house in Texas. We should never have left." Edward simply looked at her. Words meant nothing now. They had chosen the wrong path, and now they were suffering the consequences. They tried to mend things, to find warmth in their fractured marriage. But some cracks were too deep to repair. They no longer argued, but they also spoke far less. Each was lost in their own world, drowning in regrets with no way to turn back. One day, when they could no longer afford the rent, they were forced to leave the apartment. With nowhere to go, they wandered the crowded streets of Florida, lost among strangers. The final scene. The two sat on a park bench, silently watching young couples walk past, holding hands and laughing. Neither spoke, but in their hearts, they both understood. They had lost what was truly precious in life. Not money, not fame, but trust. The sincere love they once had but never cherished. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the laughter of the young. Edward and Linda just sat there, motionless, two ghosts of dreams long dead. The story of Edward and Linda is not just a personal tragedy, but a reflection of the mistakes many people may make as they enter old age. As life nears its end, one can easily fall into the traps of illusion, whether it's chasing an unrealistic literary dream or desperately clinging to youth. But in the end, what truly remains? The mistakes of old age. When people reach the final chapters of their lives, wrong decisions may no longer have a chance to be corrected. Edward sacrificed financial stability to pursue an impractical dream, while Linda lost herself in vain illusions. Both paid the price with suffering and regret. Illusion versus reality. Life never unfolds the way we dream. The praise on social media did not make Edward's poetry great, just as Tony's sweet words could not make Linda young again. Understanding reality and accepting one's limitations is essential for a peaceful old age. The value of companionship. Through life's long journey, the most precious thing is neither fame nor wealth, but love and companionship. In the end, despite all the pain they caused each other, Edward and Linda had only each other left. But was it too late to mend what was broken? If only they had realized sooner that happiness isn't found in material things, but in the person who stands by your side, perhaps this tragedy could have been avoided. This story is a powerful reminder. Don't wait until the end of your life to realize what truly matters. If this story has given you a moment of deep reflection, take a second to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to continue bringing meaningful stories that touch the heart and soul. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss our next stories. Thank you for listening and being part of our journey.